Chapter 21. Shadows Beneath the Storm, Part 1. The hum of the wind's icy breath reverberated through the craggy mountain pass, each gust laced with a stinging chill that whipped across Candace's face, forcing her to pull her scarf tighter around her neck. The climb through the storm mountains had already tested every bit of strength she and Jarek possessed, but as they continued their upward trek, the relentless elements pushed them even harder. Each step felt like an invitation for the mountains to swallow them whole. They had dressed in the heaviest clothes their tribe could provide, woven tightly and lined with animal pelts, yet the chill seeped through as if to remind them of the power lying dormant in the peaks above. Jarek, a seasoned scout and her only companion on this treacherous journey, moved with a quiet resilience, the edge of his sword peeking from his cloak. A few feet behind him, Candice adjusted the strap on her quiver, her fingers brushing against her short bow and the blow dart loaded with precious sleeping darts. The wind howled louder as they climbed, carrying with it a warning they couldn't decipher, and as the first snowflakes drifted down, Candice caught Jarek's gaze. His lips pressed into a thin line, and with a silent nod they pressed forward. Hours passed as they fought the elements. The snow thickened, swirling in wild spirals that turned the world into a chaotic white haze, and the trail disappeared beneath drifts that grew with each step. The blizzard caught them without warning, an icy grip that clawed at their skin and froze their limbs. Their fingers stiffened, their steps slowed, and soon each breath became an effort. "Candice!" Jarek's voice barely cut through the storm as he grabbed her shoulder. "We need shelter now." Candice looked around, but the mountains seemed to mock them, their sharp edges blurring into shadows against the white. Together they stumbled forward, their feet slipping on the rocky ground buried under layers of ice and snow. The minutes dragged on, the cold seeping deeper as they searched. When they finally found a small outcropping beneath a ledge, they dropped to their knees, huddling together for warmth. The storm raged around them, its fury dampened only by the narrow shelter. They sat in silence, sharing the faint warmth that pulsed between their bodies, and gradually sensation crept back into their limbs. Candice closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, feeling each frozen finger thaw. A part of her wished for the familiar jungle warmth of home, but she shook the thought away. There was no room for nostalgia here, only survival. The storm began to abate, its fury giving way to a quiet stillness. The snow settled, leaving the world silent and white, a fragile peace that lingered in the aftermath. "We'll keep going," Jarek said, helping her to her feet. She nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavy in her bones. They continued their ascent, moving with renewed caution until the mountains took on a different shape, a rugged, foreboding maze of rocks and cliffs that wound their way up to the peaks. In the distance, Candice could make out shadows flickering between the stone formations, but as she strained her eyes, they vanished. She glanced at Jarek, wondering if he'd noticed, but his gaze was fixed ahead, focused. Suddenly the shadows reappeared, closer this time. Figures moved through the snow, emerging from the crevices, their small forms half hidden beneath cloaks woven from rough gray fabric that blended seamlessly into the stone around them. Candice's heart quickened. She'd heard whispers of the Derricks, the dwarves of the mountains, but this was her first time seeing them up close. Their skin was thick, an unusual shade of gray, almost blending into the stone itself. Their faces were expressionless, eyes hard as they surveyed the intruders. Candice held up her hand in a tentative greeting. "We mean no harm," she said, though she knew they wouldn't understand her words. The Derricks exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing. One of them stepped forward, his hands making strange, fluid gestures, his gaze fixed on Candice and Jarek with suspicion. Candice raised her hands, trying to show they were unarmed, at least in appearance. She took a step closer, feeling the tension thicken around them. But before she could say another word, the Derrick leader's hands moved, and with a sudden surge, the ground quivered. A tremor snaked through the rocky ground beneath their feet, and Candice staggered back. The Derrick leader's hands glowed faintly, the earth around them responding to his call. Candice and Jarek exchanged a glance, fear and astonishment flickering in their eyes. They had never seen magic like this, not like the shamanic rituals of their people. This was something raw, ancient, and it didn't bode well. Jarek. Before she could finish, the derricks advanced, their eyes alight with anger. A stream of water coalesced at the derrick leader's fingertips, whipping toward them in sharp, icy arcs. Candice ducked, feeling the cold sting as droplets grazed her cheek. She drew her short bow, instinct guiding her hands as she nocked an arrow, but one of the derricks lunged at her, brandishing a jagged stone dagger. "Get back!" she shouted, her voice breaking as she loosed the arrow. It struck true, but the derrick barely flinched, his thick skin absorbing the impact as he closed in on her. She felt the blade slice across her arm, a hot burst of pain cutting through the cold. Jarek sprang into action, his movements sharp and deadly. He pulled his short sword free, blocking another derrick's strike with a fierce growl. Candice fought beside him, clutching her bleeding arm as she deflected blows with her hunting knife. Every motion sent a fresh wave of pain through her, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to yield. The derricks were relentless, moving with a coordination that spoke of years defending their mountain. The earth shifted beneath them, jutting up to create barriers that forced Candice and Jarek to backtrack. But with each step, they adapted, falling into a rhythm born of desperation. Jarek was fierce, every strike fueled by a focus Candice had rarely seen in him before. As she stumbled, he surged forward, cutting through their attackers with a ruthless precision that kept them at bay. Gradually, they gained ground. Candice could feel her strength waning, but Jarek fought on, his blade flashing through the air in a blur of steel. Finally, the derricks hesitated, their leader signaling a retreat. Candice sank to her knees as the dwarves vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only silence and the lingering taste of iron. Jarek knelt beside her, breathing hard. "You're hurt," he said, inspecting the wound on her arm. He reached into his pack, pulling out a cloth to bandage it. His hands were steady, his gaze fixed on the wound with a mix of worry and determination. As he wrapped her arm, Candice noticed something glinting in the snow beside the body of a fallen derrick. She reached for it, her fingers closing around a small pouch. Inside, she found several strange iridescent stones, their surfaces etched with faint markings that pulsed with a light she couldn't understand. "What are these?" she whispered, holding one up to Jarek. He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know, but they're important to them." He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the mountains for any sign of the derricks. "We should keep moving. They may come back." Candice nodded, her fingers tightening around the pouch as she followed him toward a narrow cave they'd spotted earlier. Inside, the cold stone walls offered little warmth, but it was shelter, a brief reprieve from the merciless elements. Jarek lit a small fire, the flames flickering weakly as they cast shadows on the walls. Candice leaned back, exhaustion settling over her as she examined her bandaged arm. The pain throbbed, but the wound was clean, and Jarek had done his best to secure it. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. But even as her muscles relaxed, the memory of the derricks lingered, their fierce gazes and strange, magical power seared into her mind. There was something ancient in those stones they guarded, something that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own, a reminder of the forces lying dormant in the depths of these mountains. And as the shadows danced on the cave walls, she couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter was only the beginning. The sky had cleared as Candice and Jarek resumed their trek, though the cold lingered, settling deep in their bones. Each step northward through the mountains felt heavier, the thin air and rugged paths forcing them to conserve every ounce of strength. Despite the exhaustion, the sheer beauty around them, tinged with an eerie stillness, made them pause every so often, as though they were not merely passing through, but being watched. Around midday, they caught sight of small, unassuming shapes moving in the snow. A family of mountain goats nimbly hopped from rock to rock, their coats blending into the icy landscape. Candice felt a faint warmth at the sight, something alive, something peaceful in these desolate peaks. She nudged Jarek and pointed. He nodded, a small smile breaking his usual stoic expression. But just as they began moving again, Candice heard a sudden crackle of snow from above. A flash of dark fur darted into her peripheral vision, a large, lean predator stalking the goats with lethal precision. The beast pounced. The goats scattered, but one was too slow, bleeding as the predator's jaws clamped down, its growls echoing through the mountains. Candice and Jarek froze, hoping to avoid drawing the creature's attention, but as it turned, blood staining its muzzle, it caught their scent. "Go!" Jarek hissed, clutching her arm and pulling her into a run. They raced along the narrow path, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. Behind them, the creature let out a guttural roar, a sound that rattled the air. Candice felt its presence like a shadow, the force of it pressing close. She glanced back, catching a glimpse of the predator, a towering feline creature, long claws digging into the snow as it bounded toward them, relentless in its pursuit. "Jarek! This way!" she shouted, pointing to a jagged path branching off. They veered right, the narrow passage winding downward, making it harder for the creature to follow. But the beast didn't relent. It chased them through the cliffs, its growls reverberating against the stone walls. A wave of fear flooded Candice, but she pushed it aside, her instincts honed on survival. Her eyes darted, searching for an opening, a crevice they could squeeze into. They found none. Instead, the path began to widen, opening to a small plateau. Jarek drew his short sword, his breaths coming in sharp bursts as he faced the direction from which they had come. Candice notched an arrow, focusing on the approaching creature. The predator lunged into view, its form sleek and powerful, dark eyes glinting with hunger. Candice let her arrow fly, and it struck the beast in the shoulder. It staggered but recovered, now angrier than before. With a snarl, it charged at them. Jarek lunged, sidestepping its claws and driving his sword into its side. The creature howled, twisting around to swipe at him, but Candice fired another arrow, hitting it near the neck. Blood sprayed across the snow as the beast finally faltered, slumping forward. They waited, breaths harsh, muscles tense. When it lay still, Candice lowered her bow, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her. "Nice shooting," Jarek muttered, wiping his blade. Candice managed a shaky nod, her heart pounding. The chase had taken its toll, but the mountain continued to beckon them forward. They gathered themselves, exchanged a silent look, and resumed their journey, the wind whistling around them as they pressed on. As dusk fell on their third day in the mountains, they came across an opening in the rock, a shallow cavern that seemed untouched by time. The air inside was dry, with an earthy scent that reminded Candice of the deep roots of the jungle trees back home. They stepped in, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. The walls of the cavern held markings, ancient symbols and figures etched into the stone in faded pigments. Jarek moved closer, his fingers grazing the rock, eyes scanning each figure as though searching for a hidden message. "Look at this," he said, gesturing to a series of drawings. Candice joined him, squinting to make out the images. The paintings depicted long lines of people, traveling from one end of the wall to the other, led by a figure with a tall staff. The figures moved past a body of water, perhaps the lake, and toward a towering figure that watched over them. The style was unmistakably Nethari, the lines and patterns woven with meaning. "Is that the Watcher?" she whispered, tracing the towering figure that seemed to radiate authority and power. Jarek nodded, his eyes gleaming with recognition. "It's our people crossing from the north. These paintings, they must be from the time after the cataclysm, from when we first settled these lands." Candice's fingers stilled on the cold rock as she tried to comprehend the implications. To find evidence of their ancestors' journey here, in the Storm Mountains, was a strange and powerful coincidence. It was as if the mountains themselves had been waiting for them to uncover this piece of their history. "I've seen ruins in the jungle," Jarek murmured, "but two in one journey? And in these mountains?" He shook his head, his expression a mix of awe and suspicion. Candice's mind raced, her gaze lingering on the Watcher, the figure's painted eyes meeting hers as though it could see her, could hear the unspoken questions stirring in her soul. The Watcher, the symbol of their people's strength and resilience. The connection to her ancestors felt stronger than ever, as if each line on the wall were a thread linking her to a past she had never known, to voices long since silenced. They huddled in the cavern that night, finding solace in the ancient markings. The storm winds howled outside, but the cavern's walls shielded them, providing a rare sense of peace. Candice lay awake, her thoughts weaving through the mysteries of the past and the path ahead. The journey was not only about survival, it was about legacy, and the weight of her mission seemed to grow with each passing moment. In the early hours of dawn, they departed, leaving the cavern and its secrets behind. They climbed higher, moving steadily upward, the air thinning as they neared the highest ridges. By midday, they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a breathtaking panorama. Before them stretched the vast central lands, a patchwork of forests and valleys, winding rivers, and the shimmering, endless expanse of the giant lake. The lake gleamed under the sunlight, its surface reflecting the sky like a massive mirror, stretching so far to the north and east that its edges seemed to blend with the horizon. Even from this height, the sheer scale of it was humbling. Candice felt a chill, but it was not from the cold. The sight filled her with both wonder and a strange sense of dread. The land below was beautiful, but it held countless dangers, secrets buried within the earth, waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere out there, her path would lead her to the Empire's agents, the children of Hybris her mentor had warned her about. Jarek's voice broke the silence. "We've come a long way." Candice nodded, her gaze still locked on the lake. "And further yet to go." They stood there for a long moment, letting the immensity of the landscape sink in, a reminder of the journey behind them and the one that lay ahead. The mountains had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but they had prevailed. And now, as they looked over the vast expanse of Hybris, a quiet resolve took root within Candice. Whatever awaited them, she would face it, for her people, for her ancestors, and for the legacy etched into stone long ago. As they turned to begin their descent, she caught a last, fleeting glimpse of the Watcher's figure in her mind, the silent guardian who had watched over their journey from the beginning, a symbol of both mystery and strength. It gave her hope and reminded her of the purpose that had driven her this far, a promise she intended to keep.